this all day because this frustrates me more than it frustrates me more than anything when we talk about the NBA. It is so bleeping hard to win an NBA championship. And it is incredibly infuriating that people think that there is some foolproof way out there to just go and do it. And when people criticize what the Philadelphia 76ers did because they, again, flame out in the second round of the playoffs, then to me, that says more about you talking about the team than it does about anything the organization has done. This seems, by the way, extra relevant here now that Josh Harris, the man who greenlit this process, I don't even know if it's intended at this point. Process is an important word here, whether we're talking about the process or just process in general. But Josh Harris greenlit that. That doesn't mean he'll do it with the Commanders because football in the NFL is a very different team-building practice than it requires a different team-building practice than the NBA does. But hear me out on this. In the NBA, to win a championship, you need one of the 5 to 8 best players in the sport, period. There is one singular exception to that since 1980. That exception is the 2004 Detroit Pistons, who probably had 4 of the best 25 players, even if none of them individually was one of the 5 best in the sport. Rip Hamilton, Chauncey Billups, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace were all certainly top 40, if not top 25 NBA players at the time that fit together so incredibly perfectly that they were able to overcome the fact that they did not have a superstar in the top 5 player sense of the word. Every other champion has had LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Tim Duncan, Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, Larry Bird, Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, Dr. J. I think I literally just Kawhi Leonard. I think I have now Giannis. There, I did it. That is every single champion accounted for between now and 1980. In some ways, if the Lakers were to pull this off, they would be a gigantic exception because Anthony Davis doesn't consistently play at that level, and LeBron is probably fallen out of that, although maybe not. Jimmy Butler obviously would be an exception. He is exceptional and even better in the playoffs, but is not consistently a top 5 player, which should tell you that it's probably going to be a Nuggets-Celtics final between Jason Tatum and Nikola Jokic, both of whom qualify. In order to be competitive for a championship, to have a real legitimate shot, you need to acquire one of those players. And while the way those players have emerged in the league has diversified some over the last decade, in part because the NBA hasn't quite figured out how to nail their scouting on international players. And so guys like Jokic and Giannis, who had played in either lower-level leagues or didn't really fit a mold, kind of slipped through the cracks. Typically, you acquire those players with high draft picks. And frankly, you'd rather have the high draft pick than the lower one because the lower one always, even if you know and everybody else doesn't, requires you to get lucky. If the Bucks didn't know Giannis was going to be Giannis, but let's pretend that they did. Do you think they really wanted to draft him at 15? No, they would have loved to draft him at 1 because then you're guaranteed to have him. And so what the Philadelphia 76ers did is took a team whose best player was Drew Holiday and was consistently finishing in the Washington Wizards range. Trade Drew Holiday, strip it down for parts, accept that being bad for multiple years was going to be a part of what they were going to do, and took a bunch of gigantic swings on uber-talented players year after year after year, knowing that the NBA draft is an enormous crapshoot, and that they weren't going to be able to dip down for a year, be bad, and then sign free agents and all of a sudden be good again and legitimately compete for a championship year in and year out. And now, I can hear the people who hate this all of a sudden saying, or as loud as they can, screaming, well, they haven't competed for championships. Okay. They have not made a conference final. But would you say they have had a legitimate shot to? Of course. They were just lost in Game 7. They lost on the Kawhi shot to the eventual champions. They've been a 50-win team 4 times in the last 6 years. That is one of the most consistent runs of excellence that has existed in the league during that time. I didn't look this up. I should have. I apologize. There can't be more than 2 franchises that have more wins than them in the last 6 years. And I'm sorry, but getting bad, whether it's bad luck or poor execution and things falling apart in the playoffs, can't be the measure of the initial idea in the first place. Were they in position to win? Routinely. Yes. Did they fall short? Also yes. Is the second fact a reflection of the decision they made to build their team in a way that was so much smarter than anyone else had ever tried doing it? Absolutely not. Now, again, you might say, well, Craig, they never won a championship. Isn't it smarter to build the way the Lakers have or the Heat have? Sure, if you can be the Los Angeles Lakers and have free agents just come to you, you should absolutely do that. You want to know who can't do that? 29 other NBA franchises. If you can have Pat Riley come run your organization and build the single best culture in the NBA and get one of the 15 best coaches to have ever played the sport, who, by the way, has his reputation and the belief in him buoyed by the fact that he's a champion, thanks to the fact that LeBron James decided to go play with Dwayne Wade, then hell yeah, you should do that. But that's not a sustainable plan. What the Sixers did was take luck out of the equation, knowing they were going to have bad luck along the way. And you could argue they've had pretty terrible luck. And they still have Joel Embiid, and they still have won 50-plus games 4 times in the last 6 years, something that, say, I don't know, the Washington Wizards haven't done since 1979. It's also something the Sixers hadn't done. The first year of the process was 2013, 2014. I believe it might have been 14-15. They win sub-30 games for 3 years. Do you realize how many teams have done that on accident because they're just bad? It allowed them, by the way, being bad, to take risks. To take guys like Nerlens Noel, who didn't ultimately pan out, but also like Joel Embiid, who had massive injury risks, and take their time with them. Ben Simmons, who for a while was working out great. He's a multi-time All-Star who was averaging like 20 and 10 and was a consistent contender for Defensive Player of the Year. Don't let Simmons now misconstrue who Simmons was and what Simmons should have been. What happened to Ben Simmons is much more a reflection of Ben Simmons, and what happened to him is he grew into being a mid-20s NBA player, and then ultimately how the organization treated him when he started going through serious mental health problems, and the way we as a society reflect that, than it is Sam Hinkie in the process and all those types of things. That doesn't mean that every team that's mediocre needs to tank. It doesn't mean that it's foolproof. But I think that the idea that everyone just wants to dump on them because they lost again and say it's a failure, when, by the way, the guy who architected the thing was fired before it could ever take off, and some of the worst decisions that have been made in the last 5 years of the 76ers were made by the guy that replaced him in Brian Colangelo, who disgracefully got himself fired, including taking Markelle Fultz over Jason Tatum, which pretty much most people at the time knew was a mistake. I don't think people realized how big of a mistake it would be, but Tatum was special and Fultz was a risk. And Colangelo took Fultz. That's not on the process. Shoot, they got the number 1 pick. That's what you want. When Danny Ainge was willing to trade back to 3, that should have been a sign if you couldn't figure it out on your own. But the process was sound. The execution was bad. Same could be said about Doc Rivers' coaching. He's now lost more Game 7s in the playoffs than most coaches will ever reach in their careers. It's truly wild. And blown multiple 3-2, 3-1 leads. Like, Doc in the playoffs kind of ain't it. This is a long track record at this point. Excellent regular season coach. If the Wizards had an opening where they are with their franchise, I'd absolutely take Doc Rivers here. I think he's an excellent head coach. Probably will go to the Hall of Fame and probably deserves it. But his playoff record's not very good. And when they fire Brett Brown, a guy who was seen as a tactician, for a guy in Doc who is obviously a very good tactician but doesn't have that playoff je ne sais quoi. Like, that's a decision that I think was questionable at the time. So, bad management, bad coaching, players imploding or having incredibly bad luck with injuries, whether it's Fultz, whether it's Simmons with his back, whether it's Embiid never being healthy for the playoffs for a variety of reasons, including bad luck. Like, that's not a reflection of the process. The process was never about, hey, this is going to win you a championship. What the process did that's different than every other team that's ever tried to do anything in terms of team building was it sacrificed a couple of years to theoretically set up a decade of competitive basketball. And 6 years into that decade, they have won 50 games 4 times. That is an unmitigated success. Their inability to finish is a different story. But unless Joel Embiid goes somewhere, they're going to finish that decade being competitive every single year. And maybe I'm just super sensitive to this because I cover a team that hasn't been competitive in decades. Realistically. Decades. But the idea that the Sixers are mid, the idea that the Sixers are a failure, the idea that the Sixers are anything but a team that needs to break through in the playoffs, which might involve making some changes, is just wrong. 50-plus wins, 4 out of 6 years, and no signs of slowing down because they've got the league MVP coming off his best ever season, to me says you're successful. That, to me, crosses my bar of success. You're in it, realistically, in it, every single year. And considering most franchises never touch in it, that's really impressive. Which, if I'm going to take a 30-second, detour to end here, is why the Washington Wizards should blow it up. It's why, if they're serious about championships, someone like the Portland Trail Blazers probably need to make changes, although Damian Lillard is a significantly better player than Bradley Beal at this point in their respective careers. It's why teams like Oklahoma City and San Antonio, who don't have the media pressure of some of these other markets and who will get fan support whether they're good or not because they're the only show in town, take similar strategies. They take bigger risks. They're willing to make big trades. And what they're not willing to do is be mediocre and be in the middle. They maximize their assets, which is all the Sixers did. They just took it to a level that no one else had done before, and it's working, even if it hasn't worked to the tune of an NBA championship yet.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.